right. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the CASBO Government Relations Team overview of the Governor's May revision proposal for 25-26. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Petrowski, and I have the honor to serve as CASBO's Chief Governmental Relations Officer, and I am joined today by my colleagues who will introduce themselves shortly. A few notes before we begin. As a reminder to all attendees, this webinar is being recorded, and all registered attendees will receive a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides once this wraps up. If you have any questions, please direct them to the Q&A. So this will help us with any questions we are unable to answer today. If you are joining us via the YouTube live stream, the staff is monitoring the chat there, but please email any unanswered questions you have to the govrelations@casbo.org email inbox, and we will get those answered for you as well. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Heinz, CASBO's president, for some framing remarks and his introduction.
Thanks, Sarah. Yep, Eric's gone, and hopefully he's here watching. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Heinz. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Administrative Services at the Colusa County Office of Education, and I'm the current CASBO president.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Laura Lilley. I am the Senior Director of District Business Services at the Placer County Office of Education, and I'm currently the Legislative Committee Chair.
And good afternoon, I'm Chris Delehanty. I'm the Assistant Superintendent, Business Services in Del Mar Union School District, and I am the Legislative Committee Assistant Chair.
Okay, I know we are all anxious to see what has happened since January and the changes, and we're ready to discuss those. Just a reminder before we get too deep into it, I just want to remind you that the May revision is revising the January proposal. So the process essentially builds on what we learned in January. So if we don't specifically see a revision to something from January and May, that January proposal would remain unchanged. An example I'm thinking about is the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. We don't have a slide on that today, but that's because there's been no change since January. So we just want to lay that out for you. So let's first take a look at the broader fiscal landscape now as compared to January. You might recall back in January, we had some uncertainty, specifically around the LA fires. Those had just occurred. The January proposal was essentially done, and then we had those fires. So those financial impacts weren't included. Fast forward to May, we still see some uncertainty in regards to the federal administration, particularly the tariffs and how that impact will impact our state. And we have some lowered revenue projections in the budget year and beyond. Mostly due to anticipated personal and corporate tax expectations in those out years. At the same time, we're also seeing the state's non-98 baseline expenditures increasing. So we have a balanced budget overall, but we did have a problem with expenditures that the governor had to resolve coming into the May revision. So as we can see here, we've sort of laid out for you what happened in January versus what we're seeing now in May. So general fund expenditures are down about $2 billion as compared to January. Prop 98 revenues in the budget year 25-26 are down $4.3 billion as compared to January. The state's budget reserves, they're dipping into those a little bit. They're lower by $1.2 billion. You might remember back in January, it was projected that there would be some mandatory payments to the Prop 98 rainy day reserve in both the current year and the budget year. I think totaling $1.5 billion that we show here on the slide. Now there is projecting a $540 million deposit in 24-25 and a withdrawal of that same amount in 25-26. So essentially we've exhausted that rainy day fund and it's now down to zero. So that means still no trigger of our school district reserve caps in the 25-26 budget year. So we've looked at an overview of the changes at the state level, and let's delve a little bit deeper into the key pieces of Prop 98 specifically. Here we've again shown you the difference between January and May. That's a theme for our slides today. And just a reminder that the state's budget is a little different than our local budgets, which are current plus 2 years, but we're going to see the prior year, the current year, and the budget year. So that's what we're looking at in every budget. And we show the changes here between January and May. 23-24, you'll see no change. We are at 98.5 billion. We're in test 2, which is, and Prop 98 is suspended, which creates that maintenance factor of what the state owes us back for what they can't fund. 24-25, we are still projecting to be in test 1 with a small decline there that you'll see in revenues. Our Prop 98 appropriated amount for the current year 24-25 is unchanged at the $117.6 billion. So you'll remember that we had an under appropriation that was proposed in January, and it's still here in this May revision. It's technically, I think, about 255 million less, but essentially $1.3 billion is now under appropriated. The Department of Finance is citing revenue projection risks and an attempt to mitigate the potential of appropriating over that guarantee is why they're under appropriating it. Any difference between the Prop 98 amount that we're owed and the amount appropriated is what is called a settlement. So you might see that language. For 25-26, we are still projected to be in test 1, as you'll see here, but we see a relatively large drop in revenues from 118.9 billion down to 114.6. Generally in test 1, we receive about 40% of the state's general fund dollars. We've noted here that the guarantee was rebenched. We're going to talk about that later in some future slides. But now technically we're up to 39.6 instead of 39.2. And that really is due to the consideration of additional enrollment due to universal TK, which is fully implemented in the budget year 25-26. Okay, this slide shows the details of our programs for K-12 programs. You can see our total K-12 dollars between January and May. We've gone up a little bit, 0.6 billion there. 57.3 billion is other funds. Primarily that's our property taxes. And then we have the 8.5 billion is our Prop 98 general fund. We've shown the per pupil funding compared to January to May. You can see that is relatively unchanged. And so overall that per pupil rate is remaining stable, which is good news. Okay, let's move on to local control funding formula and the COLA. So here we show the difference. We know the COLA. We now have all 8 data points for our COLA. So we know now that our COLA is 2.3%, which is down slightly from that January estimate. The cost of funding that COLA to all the programs that will receive COLA is estimated at 2.1 billion now. You might recall at the last webinar, we mentioned that state preschool was on the list of those programs that were receiving COLA. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case as of the May revise. Department of Finance indicated this is because that program also receives non-Prop 98 dollars, and it was part of the general fund savings package, so no COLA for that program. So in addition, nothing has changed since January budget for all the other programs. So we have special ed, school nutrition, mandate block grants. We also still get it on the equity multiplier, foster care, adults in correctional facilities program, charter school facilities grant program, American Indian Centers, and American Indian Early Education Program will still receive the COLA. So good news is that we still have our 23-24 and our 24 budget deferrals repaid within the budget window. So that's some good news. Some not so great news is that we are proposed a $1.8 billion deferral from June 2026 to July of 2026. There's no way right now to predict exactly what that would mean for us. But I think our very, very rough estimate is that it's under 50% is about what we're thinking that could potentially be. So you'll want to make sure you budget for that within your cash flow going into the budget year.
Unmute yourself, Chris. On to UTK. With the full implementation of UTK, we saw some changes to the funding for the program from January to May. And so you'll see the change of the 2.4 billion to 2.1 billion for the full implementation and 1.5 billion to 1.2 billion attributed to ADA reductions. Excuse me, the 1.5 to 1.2 to support the student to adult ratio adjustments. So we're happy to see them funding the adjustment from 12 to 1. We have, in having conversations, heard the changes attributed to ADA reductions as the state has updated those numbers. But we are wondering why the per ADA dropped from 6,400 to about 5,500, which is more than we would have expected with the reduced COLA. And this is something that we will be asking about and looking into as people are unwrapping and unpacking the trailer bill language. So if we look at ELOP, it's an area that we have seen some positive changes, including the trailer bill around the audit for those now new to Tier 1. And we'll see an increase from 435 million in January to 515.5 million in May. And this is proposed to cover the increase in Tier 1 districts. And the increased minimum grant should support our smaller districts. They're really trying to make sure that those new Tier 1 districts will receive the full funding that was promised. So they added some funds there. Districts were given some grace when the trailer bill showed that those new to Tier 1 will be audited as Tier 2 districts for 25-26 and begin being audited as Tier 1 in 2026-27. So that gives a bit of a glide path to implement the program as a Tier 1 district, definitely something we've been advocating for and we were happy to see in the trailer bill language. And then 25-26 is that final fiscal implementation year for ELOP, moving to universal access for LAs with 55% or more unduplicated pupils. And so we do know that there is some language that was in the January budget around how things will be audited and when we have to expend the funds, but that has not changed. And finally, as we get to the discretionary block grant, this is the best part, the discretionary block grant. And as Eric Dill would say, I'm using its last name because it remains completely discretionary in the May revise. While we did see the block grant reduced from 1.8 to 1.7 billion, I had to grin when I saw the May revise because it remains substantial and it remains set to be appropriated on a per ADA basis. We don't want to lose control of these funds, so please be sure to respond if there is a call to action as we get into the final stretches of the budget, because this is definitely an area where we could see people try to pull funds to fund other areas, and so it's something that we'll want to protect as we look forward. And beyond that, I hand it back over to Aaron, I think.
My turn. Sarah Petrowski again, jumping back in on the master plan for career education. So in January at the governor's budget proposal, we saw some very light information around the master plan for career education, primarily because we were still waiting on that actual plan to be released. So there is $3 million ongoing for the California College Guidance Initiative and the Cradle to Career Data System, which are key pieces of the governor's master plan around career education. Those are maintained at the May revise. In addition, the block grant that Chris just spoke to, the governor has pointed out that the implementation of any career education is an allowable use of those discretionary block grant dollars. And finally, the master plan was released in April of 2025. That link is on the slide, and we're going to be dropping that into the chat if you would like to review the components of that. Next, literacy instruction. This has been a key focus of the governor's budgets over the past few years. At January's budget release, $500 million for literacy and mathematics coaches, $40 million for literacy screenings related to the new reading difficulties requirement that goes into effect next school year, $5 million to support a literacy network within California's statewide system of support, and then $300,000 to support the development of the personal finance course that was required last year. At May revision, in addition to those investments, there is a $200 million proposal related to the implementation of the professional development component of a piece of legislation that is still moving its way through the process, AB 1454. This is a compromise bill around evidence-based literacy instruction, and the governor has proposed to fund a portion of it, seeing that it is a very important bill that has garnered a lot of support from the various sides of the education community. In addition, there is $10 million more related to the reading difficulty screener. This $10 million would fund one of the screeners called Multitudes, which is the free screener for local educational agencies to use starting next year. And then finally, there's some language related to authority to use federal dollars from the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant to support the work around improving literacy across California. Another piece that we've seen in many of the governor's budgets is related to teacher preparation and professional development more generally. In January, there was a $150 million proposal for a new teacher recruitment incentive grant program. At May revision, that was eliminated, and $100 million of it was repurposed for one-time funds to provide $10,000 stipends for professional educators. What Department of Finance told us is that they have noticed, seeing the data, that there are a number of teacher candidates who are unable to afford costs while they're going through the program. And so this $10,000 would hopefully get them over until their first full-time paying job as an educator, so they continue that path. There's $100 million in January to support the National Board Certification Program. That is maintained at May revision. And then finally, there is some language in the May revision that extends the timeline for candidates who received waivers for reading instruction during COVID, so that they can get those requirements completed in the next few years. And last for me, the school facilities program. So following the passage of Prop 2 last fall, the January budget proposed the sale of $1.5 billion in bonds in 25-26. This is maintained at May revision. And then new to the May revision, there is a proposal to sweep almost $80 million of unused funds from the 2023 budget that were set to expire this August for fire-affected schools. The governor's proposal notes that those schools have made it clear that they are not going to be able to utilize those funds before the expiration later this summer. And so they're sweeping that money as part of savings and instead directing any fire impacted schools to utilize the Prop 2 bond funds for those purposes.
And so we have some new proposals that are unique to the May revision this year. The first off is the Proposition 98 funding split. You may have heard earlier, Laura mentioned how there's a budget proposal to change how Prop 98 funding is divided between TK-12 and community colleges to reflect the intent of rebenching. This is related to the expansion of TK. Specifically, what that means is from the May revision budget, that would result in an additional $419 million for the TK-12 segment. This will be something that our partners in the community college we're already hearing aren't super happy about, but we have a growing program, so it was needed, and we applaud that. Next is secondary school redesign pilot program. So the governor is proposing $15 million in one-time Prop 98 general funds for a pilot program to redesign middle and high school. And so schools that are participating in this will be required to develop programs that better serve the needs of all students through included personalizing the learning environment, integrating experiential education and new uses of technology, and also to support deeper learning for their students. And lastly, one of the new proposals is the TK Multilingual Learner Supplemental Funding. So this is a one-time $7.5 million coming out of Prop 98. And this addresses the reduction in LCFF supplemental concentration grant funding due to the exemption of TK students from the English language proficiency assessments for California, the LPAC. So I'd like to open it up to the rest of the panel for any takeaways and next steps you might have. First, I don't think we're being super harmed by this, but you know, anytime I see a deferral, you know, it makes me pause.
I think we're fortunate to see the flexibility with ELOP that's responding to districts as we see so many districts moving into Tier 1. I'm happy to see that the discretionary block grant remains strong. I think we also all have some concerns about revenues not being tied to expenditures in any budget year. I know in discussions we've had that there is concern about what revenues will come in, and so I think it's something that we'll have to monitor, and something that I know there's going to be a lot of discussion and probably some pretty strong pushback on as well, to not budget expenditures related to the revenues that are expected to come in.
Would echo that, Chris, that I do think we have revenues coming in stronger in the current year, and then we also have them going down at the expectations for them in the out year. So that sort of does make me wonder what is going to happen when it all shakes out. Of, okay, are we being extra conservative in those out years? You know, does this materialize, or maybe we're not even being conservative enough as we look in those out years?
To pick up on that, certainly there are some spaces where we are going to need to continue to advocate as we move toward the adoption of the final budget. But one of the things that we heard very loud and clear from the Department of Finance is first, that TK-12 side of the budget remains largely unscathed with the larger decline in revenues that are being forecast over the 3-year budget window. The Department of Finance has done quite a bit to make sure that things are held steady for TK-12. The other thing that we will need to be very cognizant of as we're advocating is that because the general fund side of the budget has been more impacted, we are going to need to continue to protect what we have on the TK-12 side. It is very easy for a general fund program to look at what is happening in schools and feel that they are being more negatively impacted as the revenue is declining. And we have a duty as those who work in school districts and in schools across the state to make sure we're continuing to advocate for our funding for the Proposition 98 formula and the little adjustments that are being made. Like Aaron talked about, the proposal to utilize the split and the rebench together in a different way to bring in some additional revenue. That is certainly not going to make the community college side of Prop 98 guarantee happy. And we are going to need to voice our strong support for proposals like that. I'll just add one more thing here. It is very clear from looking at the budget that the governor is committed to finishing off the implementation of the programs that were started really in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The full implementation of transitional kindergarten, full implementation of the expanded learning opportunities grant program. These are key initiatives of this governor, and he is making sure that school districts across California can continue to implement those by providing as much funding and flexibility as possible in the final years of his administration. So in terms of next steps, we are going to be writing as CASBO a May revision budget response letter to both the governor and the legislative leads. and participating in the hearings that will be happening in the next couple weeks. Those hearings will occur up until the legislature adopts this budget by June 15th, which is a statutorily required deadline for them. It's going to be a very, very fast process. So we ask that if you have questions, if you have concerns, if there are things you want to bring to our attention, please email us as quickly as possible so we can get those questions answered for you and advocate for any changes on the behalf of school business officials across the state.
Can I add, Sarah? I think this is the time of year where turnaround's fast, and CASBO has done an amazing job the last couple of years with calls to action and getting numbers together. And so your participation and quickly jumping into a call to action, it usually doesn't take much more than you putting your name and your email address and your zip code or something to that effect in. The team's made it really easy. And so I would just really suggest that, you've been interested in coming and hearing today, please support those calls to action, support the advocacy, because numbers really matter. As we all know, when we're presenting to boards, we work with boards, when they see constituents coming out, it makes a difference. And so when we can put a bunch of numbers together, it can help us advocate in that direction.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to do a quick look to see if there are any questions in the Q&A that we can answer now that we have a little bit of time. Let's see.
Sarah, while you're looking, I can jump in. I did see one about the estimated per pupil for the discretionary block grant, and I just wanted to share. We had done a very rough estimate at our county. We haven't updated it, but it was around 300 per ADA. It's kind of we came up with doing a rough estimate, so I wanted to share that.
All right, Lori, there is another question related to the discretionary block grant. If the ADA is still unknown, will it trigger the need for a 45-day revision for school districts?
I don't think that would, right? Because you're still, I think that has to be, how we look at it, our county and probably every county might be a little bit different, but it would have to be a substantial change that we would see. And I can't imagine that would be.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Another question is related to the difference in per pupil funding for the TK ratio reduction. I haven't done the math. The question is, it looks like in January it was closer to $3,200 of additional funding per TK student, and MA revision it's closer to $2,300. That is something that Chris noted that we're looking at and trying to get some more specific answers from the Department of Finance on, but I don't think any of us have the exact math in front of us. All right, another question about learning recovery emergency block grant. So yes, we talked about the discretionary block grant as an important one-time pot of money. But as Laura mentioned at the beginning, one of the things about May revision is if you do not see anything in May revision related to it, it's because nothing has changed. And we have an attendee who is bringing up learning recovery emergency block grant. That proposal from the January budget remains intact, along with all of those requirements related to a needs assessment and the local control and accountability plan process. Let's see. Laura, one of the questions is related to out-year COLAs. I remember I was sitting next to Laura at our legislative committee meeting last week, and I know she had the date in front of her. I don't know if you have it in front of you right now.
Still do, just in case. I thought that might come up. So I have the 26-27 out COLA 3.02, 27-28 3.42, 28-29 3.31, and 29-30 is 3.24. And I understand the FCMAT LCFF calculator has been updated with those. So if you didn't you didn't take notes that quick when I just said it, you have it in there if you want to go. They are updated.
All right. One of the other questions that came up is related to the reduction to Medi-Cal and reimbursement rates. This question is about the discussions happening at the federal level related to Medi-Cal, Medicare generally, and then Medi-Cal here in California. One of the things that we are tracking closely is the federal budget. We do not know exactly how that will impact things here in California. We had that discussion with the Department of Finance as well, and they are watching it closely. But for now, the impacts remain unknown as they move towards adoption of the budget at the federal level. The TK add-on, how much is the TK add-on for 25-26? That was down to 1.5 billion, if I remember correctly from the slide.
Yeah, and in the trailer bill on page 42, it has the 25-26 add-on is $5,545. So that was down from the $6,400. That was one of those that we're kind of keeping an eye on because it seemed like a bigger drop than we'd expected based on the COLA.
And I think back when we met in January, there was some discussion about the methodology used by Department of Finance to figure out the additional cost, and I'm wondering, like Chris is mentioning, if maybe something about that also changed in the back.
Any other questions from our audience? Yes, and as a reminder to everybody, the slides will be sent out. And in addition, if you want to read this with a little bit more information, you can check out our news break from last Thursday. Not only is there a great summary of the May revision proposal, but there's a number of links at the bottom to the various budget documents that are released by the administration, as well as responses from the legislature and such. All right. Well, I see somebody said they were sad to join late, but don't worry. This was recorded. It's going to be sent out to you, so you can maybe watch this from the comfort of your couch this evening when you're done with the workday. We're glad it was informative for many of you. Hi, Virginia. Thanks for tuning in. And if there are no other questions now, there is the govrelations@casbo.org email address. Feel free to send any information. There's also our personal email addresses on this final slide. We would be happy to answer your questions, get your feedback so that we can very quickly advocate both with the administration and the legislature in the weeks ahead as we barrel towards June 15th. Thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. We hope this has been informative, and we will see you